Okay, I have a 30-minute talk, which I've got to give in 15 minutes, so I'm going to race through the obvious stuff. That's me. Obligatory warning. Now we get to the interesting stuff. We're going to build a blockchain at EOS, at Block 1, and it should be possible to be able to build this blockchain using first principles, thinking from what users are, who they are, who is the everybody we're going to serve, and what do they need? Can they provide it? We should be able to do that, but let's first look at the present thinking, what's existing out there in the world. The world of blockchain has been bifurcated into two spaces by Swanson. He basically says there's permissioned blockchains and then there's unpermissioned blockchains. The unpermissioned form of blockchains are like Bitcoin and Ethereum, the ones we know very well. And it turns out that in that context, what we can do is we can automate the simple things very nicely, and that is what the software does for us. It does payments, it does time stamping, and we've seen recently the emergence of ICOs. These are simple tasks done by simple smart contracts, and they're in control of value, which they can handle relatively well. There's also quite a lot of gaming going on, which is sort of a side issue. But the complex things have been left to the users. And because of this, there's some sort of fascination in there in the blockchain world with cryptography to solve complex things. So you see a lot of discussion about smart contracts, external logic, and so forth. Above this layer of complexity, we can divide it horizontally. There's simple stuff on the bottom, complex stuff on the top. And above that is, well, what is there? It's a bit of a wild west. It's an anarchy. And that can be a bit uncomfortable, especially for the business space. So what happens with business space is that people think about, okay, let's set up a space for business where we're going to do complex trades. We want to do really good stuff with blockchain to make the investment worthwhile, but these things create exposures, and exposure to risk creates problems. We need protection to try and reduce the value of that risk. And the tendency then is to handle this complex trade, we put a walled garden around the blockchain, which is to say we stop the free entry that is available on, say, Bitcoin or Ethereum, and we allow only certain elected people to come in. Now, the problem with this is that he who controls the wall is the one that sets the rules. He who permits extracts, and as the blockchain is protected by this wall, in the wall there must be a gate to get in. The gate is run by a gatekeeper. What does the gatekeeper do? Over time, the gatekeeper will charge more and more to get in. So you will find that the essential path of time is that small players will be excluded as we go forward, which is annoying because we're thinking about business here. So where do we agree? We agree that we should automate everything below the line in the simple area, and what we're disagreeing with, both sides of the permissioned or unpermissioned space, we're disagreeing with what happens above the line in the complex area. So what does business do to deal with this? Well, you know, you can divide business into different components. There's very large mega corporations, and fundamentally, I say, a large business does not want to get onto the blockchain. It's too risky. It already has very large revenues to protect. Its best strategy is always to do nothing and make money this year and worry about next year. If you're a large hedge fund, not a hedge fund, but an asset manager or a high net worth individual, your best strategy is simply to hold the value, let it appreciate, and not get involved. So you don't want to play with blockchain either. You just want to hold value. But for the rest of us, we've got a problem. We need to make money. We need to make money so that we can live. Our living will then cause demand. Our demand causes a need to trade. The trade creates revenues, which creates profits, which gives us fine living. So it's a cycle. We have to trade unless we're one of those early groups. So we're going to do trade, which also divides into two. There's complex trade and there's simple trade. The problem with simple trade is, well, we're going to automate it. If we can automate it because it's simple, we will automate it, which means we get competed out. The small businessman gets competed out of simple trade, which leaves us with complex trade. Now, complex trade is full of errors, but that turns out to be why we want to be in there. The unpredictability of complex trade means that there's this need for care, and consequently, all these errors cause the essential demand for the service, and therefore we can charge a high margin and we can make profits. So we have this yin and yang problem going on where we want to do error-free trade, but actually it's the error-filled trade that makes our money. So we need that complexity. And how does business deal with this? Well, there's all sorts of errors that are happening out there. The Bitcoin and Ethereum world are full of these sort of thefts of value, breaches of contract, extortions, customer data. All these things are happening. Business learns to deal with it. And it gets involved into its particular area. It wants to do its trade, but it doesn't want to deal with all these particular errors. And it asks IT, the blockchain technical world, to find solutions to this. So what happens then is that, well, of course, the IT business is notoriously biased, and one of the biases that the IT industry is famous for is it doesn't like the users. But, you know, let's leave that for now. Any particular problem that occurs in the IT world can be seen as a risk management problem. This is a fairly standard risk management graph. You've got probability of the event on the horizontal, and then as we go up, you've got more severity. So we obviously want to be on the bottom left, but because we're into business, we actually want to be somewhere up closer in the yellow to make things interesting so we can make some profits. Now, IT is biased towards things it knows about. It tries to solve the stuff it knows about, because if it doesn't know about it, how can it possibly solve it? It doesn't have enough data. So we do fix the stuff over on the right. The geeks will get in there and find all the common errors that happen and eventually fix them. Okay, that's a bias. The next bias is the alternate. If we don't actually see the bug happen very much, or it happens to somebody else, then we ignore it. We don't have enough information for it, and we also fall into this psychological trap that it's not going to happen to us. And these things up on the top left, what do we call them? We call them black swans. They're things that we theoretically know about, but we believe are never going to happen. And it turns out the Bitcoin and Ethereum world have a lot of black swans in them. There's a big list of them, and you know the various forks that have happened in the last 18 months or so have made us think, you know, actually this stuff isn't as reliable as we thought. So we've got to deal with a lot of these things. Coming back to the entrepreneur, the business person has to invest in the blockchain if they're going to get into businesses in this area. And what does that mean? Well, they need programmers, they need business development people, they need lawyers, accountants, all that sort of stuff. They need people, which cost money, cost salaries. They probably need a big pot of cash, maybe $1 million. It could be higher, it could be lower. You know, the ICO numbers are showing very high at the moment, but a proper business in an entrepreneurial sense should be able to do something with $1 million. They also need time, 3 months to 2 years. All of this is a really serious investment. We're asking an entrepreneur to come into a blockchain environment and put down a really serious amount of opportunity and money and people's efforts. So the question I ask is, why would an entrepreneur do that when on a blockchain you have the problem that the entrepreneur could wake up tomorrow and their entire investment is rendered useless because some black swan has happened? Some theft of value has happened, some bug has occurred, and there's no recourse. So I put it to you that actually entrepreneurs are not going into blockchain as much as we would like. They're holding back because it's too risky. And therefore, the blockchain for business, for small business, because we want to start with small business grows to large business, we want to ride that curve up. The blockchain for business is the blockchain that solves the black swan. So how do we do that? Well, you know, we've got all these problems that happen. In real life, what we do is we use this thing called trust. And that's where we got to the walled garden. We create the walled garden, and we keep untrustworthy people outside. People are let in on the inside, so that's fine. But it's got that cost of excluding people, so it's not going to work for small business. What is this thing called trust? This is an unreliable slide. Trust is supposed to be right in the middle of the slide, but it's not trustworthy. Trust, what do we know about trust? Well, People analyze based on the information they've got. They make decisions, they then take on a risk based on that decision, and then they enjoy the reward of a good decision, which then becomes information to their next analysis. So it's a cycle, it's a feedback. It goes on and on and on, which means in order to trust somebody, you have to have a relationship. You have to have a continual feedback loop going on where you can build up that information, that trust. Which is to say, it's actually too expensive. It's really expensive to have a good relationship with somebody, and it doesn't provide enough value for one trade. One trade is not going to give you enough profit to justify that. Therefore, we have to stop thinking about one trade, and we have to start thinking about all trades. We have to think about a long series of trades, and also trades between a lot of different people. And game theory has something to say here. It says that in order to develop this relationship, this trust, we need multiple rounds of games, and we need no end in sight. That is to say, we don't know when it's going to finish. We need to think about the future without any particular end point. We also need to share the profit from the trade. We need to have the sense that both of us are going to win in this particular trade. Finally, we need punishments outside the game just in case things do go wrong. So, negotiation theory tells us that we want win-win, whereas what we're getting is win-lose. Game theory says it's a net positive game that we want, but actually what we're getting is a zero-sum game, which looks like something like a prisoner's dilemma or a stag hunt. This is a game that is thought about by economists. It's a well-studied problem, but in essence, what we're looking for is the blockchain that encourages win-win as opposed to win-lose. And if we think about that, the complexity line, above the line, we want to encourage win-win, which leads us to good business, whereas below we are limited to win-lose because that's all the software can do. It can only allocate value back and forth. It cannot create value. Which leads to a bit of a problem that's going on with the Bitcoin and Ethereum worlds. They have invested in a belief in the notion that zero-sum games are the way they should solve everything. And they've, in a sense, exported zero-sum games into the environment of business, which is actually bad. It's a cost. It's not how we want to do things. And it leads to a toxification of the environment. And you see that coming out in the way that the Bitcoin and Ethereum world play out. Bad actions are normal there. You've got a problem with an ICO, you want to get the good price, so you run a DDoS on it to kill other people's activity. If there's a fat contract out there, you hack it. This is not the way we want to do business. One thing that happened recently, somebody who's not liked, somebody called a SWAT team in on their place. Rather dangerous. Whereas in win-win, we want this repeated round, no end in sight. I'm going to have to race through here. We've seen that part. If we compare the walled garden approach to the approach of game theory, we discover that the only difference is, in fact, the wall. Let's tear down the wall. Let's get rid of it. We don't need it. So the proposal then is, if we replace the wall with some form of identity, because we need that to remember who we're dealing with so that we can do that risk analysis, then we can build what I call a governed blockchain. And this is how we do it. Basically, we set up a constitution. The constitution is a set of rules, and what happens is every time you walk into the blockchain, which is to say you do a transaction, you sign a transaction, you send it into the blockchain, that transaction also signs over the constitution. It's a Ricardian contract, to use the lingo, which means you have agreed to the constitution in the act of entering into the blockchain. And therefore, we've preserved free entry, which is an important part of the whole blockchain ethos, but we've got rid of that wall. Now, once we've done that, we can set some basic rules of normal behavior, like no trolling, no thievery, and so forth and so on, but we can also create the governance institutions to keep the whole thing going. We promote delegated proof of stake, but also we can use the mechanism of the blockchain for referendums, and the referendums can be used to change the code, change the Constitution and change any other policy that we might happen to have there. And we can also add in dispute resolution because it's a contract. We can say any dispute arising out of or related to this blockchain can be resolved in our own forum. So in summary, what we're really doing here is saying, let's build a blockchain for win-win for the entrepreneur. So we take the permissioned and unpermissioned spaces and we take the best parts of them and pull them together. We want the freedom of one, but we want the protection of the other. And the way we do this is we preserve the rules of behavior that has come from the regulated or permissioned blockchain, and we preserve the free entry of the unpermissioned blockchain by means of the glue that's holding them together is that constitution. And that's a duplicate, that's there. And EOS is building that governed blockchain. Thank you.
We have time for one question for Ian.
Hey there, it seems like the United Nations could use a governed blockchain like this. Do you think so?
I don't think, that's a really difficult question to ask. I wouldn't want to put a governed blockchain in the hands of the United Nations. The problem is they're a very large bureaucracy and they will try and do it their way. So consequently, I would not be hopeful. It's far better if it's done by small groups which are capable of looking after their own interests and then bringing in organizations such as the United Nations later on. Maybe that's biased.
Can you give an example of a kind of group that might adopt this successfully? There are something like 1,000 entrepreneurs and builders of dApps which are currently working to port their ideas into the EOS blockchain as it is now. So basically it is small teams of maybe 2, 3, 4, maximum 10 people who are working up ideas to do business on the blockchain. There's about 1,000 of them so far, so I'm told.